You know the feeling. You sit down to a meal feeling fine. 45 minutes later, you are loosening your belt, lying on the couch, trying to find a position that does not feel awful, and wondering how something that tasted good going in could feel this bad once it arrived. Bloating. That tight, distended, uncomfortable fullness that has nothing to do with how much you ate and everything to do with what your digestive system is doing with it.
Definitely ate
Half
too
the people
much.
reading this right now experience it after at least one meal a day. It is so common in the West that most people have simply accepted it as a fact of life, the price of eating. Go to Japan and look for the same pattern. Look for people loosening clothing after meals, lying down with their hand on their stomach, reaching for antacids, ordering the strongest digestive tea on the menu because the meal has not landed well. You will find it far less, not never, because that would be a false claim, and I am not making false claims in this video. Japanese people have digestive systems. They get bloated sometimes, but the frequency, the severity, and the assumption that bloating after eating is simply normal are all measurably different in Japan from the West, and that difference has a clear set of causes that have nothing to do with genetics. Let me tell you what bloating actually is before I tell you what Japan is doing about it without even trying. Bloating is gas, either gas produced by bacteria fermenting undigested food in the large intestine or gas swallowed during eating, or both. When that gas accumulates faster than it can be moved through and expelled, you get the distension, the pressure, the discomfort. The causes are entirely physical, entirely influenced by behavior, and entirely addressable without a supplement, without a doctor, and without changing what you eat in any exotic or difficult way. Today, I am going to walk you through 7 reasons why the ordinary, unremarkable way Japanese people eat and live produces a digestive system that generates significantly less bloating than the Western default. Every one of them is something you can change. And stay with me until number 5, because it is the one that no Western doctor, no gastroenterologist, and no nutritionist I have seen online ever leads with, and it is probably the single biggest driver of chronic post-meal bloating in the Western population. At the very end, I will give you the 1-week anti-bloat stack, 3 specific changes you can apply starting tonight that target the 3 highest impact causes simultaneously. Let us begin. Number 1. The single most overlooked cause of post-meal bloating in the Western diet is not what you are eating, it is how fast you are eating it. When you eat quickly, you swallow air. This is not a metaphor. Rapid eating involves taking large bites, chewing minimally, and swallowing food in a way that pulls significant amounts of air into the esophagus with each swallow. That air travels into the stomach and then into the intestines, where it accumulates alongside whatever gas the bacteria in your gut are producing from the meal itself. The combination produces bloating that has nothing to do with the food's composition and everything to do with the speed at which it was consumed. The research on this is not ambiguous. Studies measuring gastric gas in fast versus slow eaters find dramatically higher gas accumulation in the rapid eaters, measured during the meal itself, before any bacterial fermentation has even occurred. You are literally inflating your gut by eating fast, before the food has had time to produce a single molecule of fermentation gas. The average Western meal is eaten in 8 to 12 minutes. The average Japanese meal, structured around multiple small dishes, eaten with chopsticks that physically limit the amount of food per bite, in a cultural context where eating is not rushed, takes significantly longer. The chopstick point is worth dwelling on specifically because it is not obvious. You cannot load a chopstick the way you can load a fork. The amount of food that fits between 2 narrow sticks is a fraction of what fits on a fork tine, and certainly a fraction of what fits on a spoon. Each bite is smaller by design, which means more swallowing events for the same amount of food, but each swallow pulls in less air because less food and less speed are involved. There is also the cultural framing. In much of the Western food environment, eating quickly is either required by time constraints or treated as neutral. The lunch break that is too short to eat slowly, the desk lunch eaten between tasks, the fast food engineered to be consumed and cleared in under 10 minutes. Japan has its own time pressures, and eating standing up at a ramen counter is not a slow experience, but the baseline expectation around meals eaten at a table is different, and that difference accumulates across hundreds of meals a year. The compounding matters. 3 fast meals daily means 3 separate air-swallowing events, each adding to a gas load the digestive system never fully clears between them. Here is the shift. At your next meal, count your chews. Not forever, not as a permanent practice, just once as a calibration exercise. The number that comes back will almost certainly be lower than 15 per bite. The target for meaningful bloating reduction is closer to 20 to 30, not for religious reasons, but because that level of chewing breaks food down, small enough that the swallowing event pulls in minimal air and the stomach receives material that is already partially processed rather than chunks that sit and ferment. Number 2. Cold carbonated beverages consumed during and after meals are one of the most direct and mechanically obvious causes of post-meal bloating, and they are almost entirely absent from the traditional Japanese meal. This requires distinguishing between two separate problems. The first is carbonation itself. Carbonated drinks introduce carbon dioxide directly into the digestive system in dissolved form, and that dissolved gas comes out of solution once it warms to body temperature inside the stomach. The result is a stomach suddenly containing far more gas than it did before the drink arrived. Some of that gas is expelled upward immediately, but a significant proportion moves into the intestines, where it adds to whatever is being generated by digestion. Drinking a carbonated beverage with a meal is, from a bloating mechanics perspective, directly injecting gas into your digestive tract. The second problem is cold specifically. Cold drinks consumed during a meal temporarily constrict the blood vessels in the stomach lining, reducing blood flow to the digestive organs at the precise moment they are most active. This slows gastric motility, which is the rhythmic muscular movement that moves food through the stomach and into the small intestine. Slowed motility means food sits in the stomach longer. Food sitting longer means more fermentation opportunity before the material reaches the parts of the gut where it can be properly processed. More fermentation means more gas. The traditional Japanese meal drink is warm or hot green tea or plain warm water, not carbonated, not cold. Both of those properties, the absence of introduced carbon dioxide and the presence of warmth that supports rather than suppresses gastric motility, directly reduce the gas load arriving in the intestinal system after a meal. This is not a traditional medicine claim dressed up as physiology. It is straightforward gas mechanics applied to what you are consuming. The practical gap between a Japanese meal with warm green tea and a Western meal with a large cold soda or sparkling water is enormous when measured purely in terms of gas introduced into the digestive tract. The soda is introducing carbon dioxide directly and in volume. The cold is slowing the system's ability to process and move what is already there. Both of these effects are additive to whatever the food itself is producing, and both of them are entirely avoidable without changing a single thing about what you eat. 2 carbonated drinks with meals amounts to a daily direct gas injection into the gut that compounds with whatever the food itself is producing. Here is the shift. For 1 week, drink nothing carbonated and nothing cold with your meals, or in the 30 minutes following them. Warm water or warm tea only. This single change removes 2 of the most direct gas inputs from every meal without any alteration to your diet. Most people who do this for 7 consecutive days report a noticeable reduction in post-meal distension before the week is out, simply because they have stopped actively inflating their gut during the meal. Number 3, the architecture of the Japanese meal is, functionally, an anti-bloating architecture, and it works through a mechanism that most people never consider. A traditional Japanese meal arrives as several small dishes simultaneously: a bowl of rice, a small portion of fish, a few vegetables, a bowl of miso soup, a small fermented side. Each item in a small quantity, covering a wide range of foods, total volume calibrated to a smaller stomach load than a typical Western main course by itself. Here is why this matters specifically for bloating. The stomach has a capacity, and when you approach or exceed that capacity in a single meal, several things happen that all point in the direction of bloating. First, the stomach has to distend physically to accommodate the volume, which creates the pressure sensation that registers as fullness and early bloating. Second, the larger the volume in the stomach, the longer it takes to empty into the small intestine, which means more time for fermentation to occur in a warm, food-rich environment. Third, large meals trigger a larger gastric acid response, and excess acid combined with slow motility produces the conditions for bacterial overgrowth and gas production. Multiple small dishes do not produce this problem because no single item represents a large stomach load. The total meal may be nutritionally equivalent, but the arrival of that nutrition in varied small portions across several dishes changes the digestive experience entirely. The stomach is comfortably full rather than overwhelmed. Gastric emptying proceeds at a normal rate. The bacterial environment in the gut is fed steadily rather than flooded. The Western meal architecture does the opposite. One large main course, often preceded by bread or a starter, containing more volume and more calories in the central dish than the entire Japanese spread. The stomach receives a large, relatively uniform load all at once, slows its motility to handle the volume, and provides an extended fermentation window to the gut bacteria. The result is predictable and familiar to anyone who has eaten a large Western restaurant meal and felt the consequences 2 hours later. Gastric emptying rate is directly related to volume received. A large meal slows emptying measurably compared to the same total food arriving across smaller dishes and a longer period. Here is the shift. For your next 3 dinners, deliberately split what you normally eat onto 2 or 3 smaller plates rather than piling everything onto one. The total food is the same. The volume per delivery is smaller. Notice what happens to your post-meal comfort compared to the same meal served Western style. The plate structure is not aesthetic. It is digestive engineering. Number 4, Japan's daily fermented food habit is doing something for the digestive system that directly and mechanically reduces bloating, and it works at the level of the gut microbiome in a way that most discussions of fermented food never reach. The gut microbiome, the community of bacteria living in the large intestine, is responsible for a significant proportion of the gas produced after eating. But here is the part that most people do not know. Not all gut bacteria produce the same gases in the same quantities. A healthy, diverse microbiome with adequate populations of beneficial bacteria produces gas more efficiently, meaning it generates less excess as a waste product of fermentation. A microbiome dominated by less beneficial bacterial strains, which is the typical output of a low-fiber, low-fermented food Western diet, produces fermentation that is less efficient and generates more gas as a byproduct. The daily Japanese fermented food stack, miso soup at breakfast, pickled vegetables with meals, natto for those who eat it, feeds and maintains the beneficial bacterial populations that produce cleaner fermentation. This is not an abstract wellness benefit. It is a direct input into the biochemistry of gas production in your gut. A better fed microbiome with higher populations of efficient beneficial bacteria produces less bloating as a mechanical consequence of more efficient fermentation. The Japanese miso soup point is particularly important in this context because miso is consumed warm at the beginning of the meal, which means it arrives in the gut ahead of the main food mass. The live beneficial bacteria in unpasteurized miso begin supporting the digestive environment before the major fermentation substrate, the meal itself, has even arrived. This is not the same as taking a probiotic capsule with your food, which delivers bacteria alongside or after the meal. It is delivering bacterial support to the gut in advance, which is a meaningfully different timing effect. The contrast with the Western diet is stark. The Western gut is typically receiving little to no live fermented food input on a daily basis. Probiotic supplements exist to partially address this gap, but they are consumed inconsistently, in lower bacterial diversity than fermented foods provide, and without the food matrix that helps bacteria survive transit to the gut. The result is a microbiome that is less well-maintained, less diverse, and less efficient as a fermentation system, producing more gas per gram of food processed. Diversity matters here specifically. A probiotic capsule typically delivers 1 or 2 bacterial strains. The varied fermented foods of the Japanese daily diet feed dozens of species simultaneously, which is a meaningfully different microbiome input. Here is the shift. Add 1 fermented food to every meal for the next week. Not a capsule. Actual fermented food. A tablespoon of miso dissolved in hot water at breakfast. A small portion of sauerkraut, kimchi, or pickled vegetables alongside lunch or dinner. The scale is small. The effect on microbiome composition begins within days of consistent intake. The gas reduction that follows from a better maintained fermentation system is real, measurable, and compounds over time. Number 5. This is the one I promised. The driver of chronic post-meal bloating that no one is talking about, that no supplement addresses, and that explains why people change their diet add probiotics, eliminate gluten, and still bloat after every meal. The vagus nerve connects the brain to the digestive system and acts as the primary communication pathway between your mental state and your gut's ability to function. When you are relaxed, the vagus nerve is active, the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, and the digestive system receives the biological signal to perform its full range of functions. Gastric acid is secreted at the right levels. Gastric motility operates at the correct pace. The muscular contractions that move food through the gut proceed in the right rhythm. Digestion works. When you are stressed, anxious, or in any state of sympathetic nervous system activation, the vagus nerve activity is suppressed. The body is allocating resources toward the perceived threat, and digestion is a non-essential function during a threat response. Gastric acid secretion becomes irregular. Gastric motility slows or becomes disorganized. The muscular contractions that move gas and food through the gut lose their rhythm. Food and gas sit. Fermentation accumulates. Bloating follows. Most people in the West eat under stress as a baseline condition. Lunch eaten at a desk while processing emails. Dinner eaten while watching something distressing. A meal rushed between 2 appointments with the mental load of what comes next running in the background the entire time. In every one of those situations, the sympathetic nervous system is at least partially engaged, and the digestive system is at least partially suppressed. The bloating that follows is not caused by the food, it is caused by the state in which the food was consumed. The Japanese meal, eaten seated, at a pace that allows actual tasting, in a context where the meal is the primary activity rather than a background one, is a parasympathetic meal. It is eaten in the biological state that allows digestion to work. This is not mysticism about mindful eating, it is straightforward autonomic nervous system physiology. The parasympathetic state allows the digestive system to do its job. The sympathetic state interferes with it. Japan's meal culture consistently produces the first state. Western meal culture consistently produces the second. Identical meals eaten calmly versus while working produce different bloating. The food was unchanged. The nervous system state was not. Here is the shift. Before your next meal, spend 90 seconds doing nothing. Put down the phone, close the laptop, sit at a table, breathe slowly for 6 full breath cycles. This is not a wellness ritual. It is a vagal activation exercise. You are switching the nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic mode before the food arrives, so the digestive system receives that food in the state it needs to process it efficiently. Do that before every meal for 1 week and compare your post-meal bloating to the current baseline. Number 6. The baseline Japanese diet happens to be structured around foods that are among the lowest bloating triggers available, while the baseline Western diet is structured around the foods that are among the highest. This is not intentional. It is the result of 2 food cultures that developed around very different staple ingredients, and the digestive consequences could not be more different. Wheat is the primary bloating trigger in the Western diet, and its role is difficult to overstate. Not because most people have celiac disease, and not because gluten is universally harmful, but because wheat contains a specific type of carbohydrate called fructans, which are fermented by gut bacteria and produce large amounts of gas in a significant proportion of the population. Wheat fructans are present in bread, pasta, cereals, baked goods, crackers, and the vast majority of processed food products. The Western diet delivers fructans at virtually every meal and every snack. The gut bacteria encounter fructans constantly and produce fermentation gas constantly. Rice, Japan's staple carbohydrate, contains almost no fructans. It is one of the lowest FODMAP foods available, meaning it produces minimal fermentation and minimal gas in virtually all populations. Replacing wheat with rice as the primary carbohydrate of a meal is, from a fermentation gas perspective, one of the single most impactful dietary changes available for bloating reduction. Not because rice is nutritionally superior in every dimension, but because it does not feed the fermentation process that produces the gas. The secondary difference is in the vegetable selection. Japanese cooking relies heavily on vegetables that are well tolerated digestively: daikon radish, burdock root, bamboo shoots, edamame, and seaweed alongside more universally consumed vegetables. Western cooking leans heavily on cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage at dinner, all of which are high fermentation foods that produce significant gas in many people. This is not to say those vegetables are bad. They are nutritionally excellent. But eaten in large quantities at dinner, when the digestive system is winding down rather than ramping up, they produce exactly the overnight bloating that so many Western people wake up with. 2 slices of wheat bread produce more fermentation gas than a cup of rice. That single swap at 1 meal per day already meaningfully reduces the gut's daily fermentation gas burden without any other change. Here is the shift. For 3 dinners this week, replace whatever carbohydrate you normally eat with plain steamed rice and notice what happens to your post-meal and morning after bloating. You are not committing to a dietary change. You are running a controlled experiment with a single variable. The result will be informative regardless of what it is, and for most people it is informative enough to change what is in their pantry permanently. Number 7. The digestive system has a cleaning cycle, and Japan's meal culture preserves it. Western meal culture destroys it almost entirely, and the loss of that cleaning cycle is one of the most underappreciated drivers of chronic bloating that exists. The migrating motor complex is a cyclical pattern of muscular contractions that sweeps through the stomach and small intestine during fasting periods between meals. It is sometimes called the housekeeping wave. It moves undigested food particles, mucus, and bacteria from the small intestine into the large intestine, preventing the bacterial accumulation in the small intestine that produces a specific and severe form of bloating. This cleaning cycle only activates during fasting. It requires approximately 90 minutes of not eating to initiate and runs in repeated cycles during extended fasting periods. Every time you eat or drink anything caloric, the migrating motor complex resets. It stops the cleaning cycle and redirects the digestive system toward processing the new arrival. This is correct and appropriate when meals are actually happening, but when eating is continuous, when snacks follow meals, which are followed by more snacks, which are followed by a second course, which is followed by a digestive tea with honey and then a small something before bed, the migrating motor complex never runs. The small intestine never gets cleaned out. Bacterial populations accumulate in places they should not be and produce gas in quantities the gut was not designed to manage. Japan's eating culture has historically been structured around discrete meals with genuine non-eating periods between them. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with very little in the spaces between. This is not universal, and modern Japan has convenience stores on every corner full of snacks. But the cultural baseline of 3 proper meals and a clean gut between them preserves the migrating motor complex ability to function, which means the small intestine stays cleaner and the bacteria stay in the places they belong. Western eating culture has moved almost entirely in the direction of continuous eating. The mid-morning snack, the desk grazing, the afternoon pick-me-up, the something before dinner, the something while watching television, the something before bed. Each of these seems small individually. Collectively, they maintain a digestive system that is in a permanent state of active processing and never runs the housekeeping cycle that would keep the small intestine clean. The chronic bloating that many people experience regardless of what they eat is often this problem. Not food sensitivity, not microbiome imbalance, just a gut that is never given the uninterrupted quiet time it needs to clean itself out. When the cleaning cycle cannot run, bacteria accumulate where gas cannot easily be expelled, producing the tight, persistent bloating that does not resolve regardless of what or how little was eaten at the last meal. Here is the shift. Stop eating completely for 4 hours between each meal, not 3 hours, 4. That is the minimum window needed to run even one full migrating motor complex cycle. Water is fine. Plain black coffee or plain tea with nothing added is acceptable. Anything caloric resets the clock. For most people, enforcing this boundary between meals is the single highest impact change available for chronic bloating, and it is available at no cost, with no dietary change, starting at your next meal. 7 causes. And the striking thing about the list, when you see it all together, is that none of them are the answer most people are chasing when they are chronically bloated. Nobody is recommending an elimination diet. Nobody is identifying a food sensitivity. Nobody is diagnosing a medical condition. Every single one of these causes is behavioral, structural, and rooted in how the meal is experienced rather than specifically what the meal contains. Eating fast enough to swallow air, cold carbonated drinks introducing gas directly while slowing the system that should process it, one large meal overwhelming the stomach instead of smaller distributed dishes, an under-maintained gut microbiome producing inefficient, high-gas fermentation, a nervous system too activated to support digestion, a diet built around high-fermentation carbohydrates, and a digestive system never given the quiet time its housekeeping cycle requires. Japan's food culture addresses every one of these without a person in Japan consciously deciding to reduce their bloating. It happens as a side effect of eating in the way that culture eats, at the pace it eats, with the foods it eats, in the digestive state it produces. The absence of chronic post-meal bloating is not a medical achievement. It is a behavioral one produced by daily habits that happen to keep the digestive system in the conditions it needs to function well. Here is the 1-week anti-bloat stack. 3 changes, not 7. The 3 highest impact items from this list, chosen because they each target a different mechanism and because implementing all 3 together produces compounding effects rather than just adding them linearly. First, eat every meal at a table with nothing else happening and take twice as long as you currently do to finish it. Put the fork down between bites. This addresses the swallowed air problem and the stress digestion problem simultaneously by creating the conditions for parasympathetic digestion and reducing the pace at which air enters the system. Second, drink nothing cold and nothing carbonated during or for 30 minutes after meals. Warm water or plain warm tea only. This removes the direct gas introduction and the motility suppression that cold drinks produce, clearing the way for the meal to be processed at its natural rate. Third, enforce a 4-hour gap between all eating occasions. If lunch ends at 1, nothing enters the mouth that has calories before 5. This preserves the migrating motor complex and keeps the small intestine from becoming a bacterial accumulation site. Those 3 changes applied consistently for 7 days will reduce post-meal bloating more significantly than most people expect from something that costs nothing, requires no supplements, and involves no dietary restriction. What they will not do is fix a genuine underlying medical condition, and if your bloating is severe, constant, and accompanied by pain, that conversation belongs with a doctor rather than a YouTube video. For everyone else, the changes are available tonight, starting with the next meal you sit down to. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 causes you think is most responsible for your own post-meal bloating, and what changes after a week of the stack. And if someone in your life has tried eliminating foods, cutting gluten, taking probiotics, and still bloats after every single meal, share this with them. Sometimes the answer is not in what you are eating, it is in how, when, and in what state you are eating it. I will see you in the next one.